Lights flashing, dark nights, whispers in the air. He steps forth from the shadows, Dakota's there. Hunting myths and legends, chasing the unknown. Machines hum in the silence, gears grind in the dark. FrandsenFiles open wide, scrolls of untold lore. Crackling thunder through the screen, asking for more. Through haunted corridors in towns forsaken, the specialist strides forward, truths are awakened.
Monsters are real.
There aren't any such things as monsters.
Yes, there is. There is.
It's Bigfoot.
Big stinking Sasquatch.
It might be hard for some people to believe that the subject of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name you want to utilize for this creature, was a topic that I initially didn't have a lot of belief in. I always tried to keep somewhat of a skeptical mindset when it came to supernatural concepts. But nevertheless, fate seemed to have different plans. And how this story unfolded continued to radiate till recent years. Is Bigfoot an alien?
What does the Lord say?
Alien. You mean an alien?
Yes.
Maybe. Who knows? The 2020s are weird enough to where anything is possible, right? But the South Hills Sasquatch is one of my own personal cases. And I figured it's time for a little bit of a story. Something to share with you all. And even though footage from this particular case, as I recorded it at the time, has been lost, unfortunately, there's been a number of transfers to different computers and not all the necessary data was saved properly and blah, 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 blah. And the little bit that I did have saved on YouTube channel at the time, for some reason, it got flagged by copyright filters by the Olympic community. If anyone has any ideas on how that happened, I don't. Feel free to share. But still, this was a truly remarkable incident. And it's one that I've been fortunate enough to collect physical evidence on. Physical evidence that has actually been given validation by university professors.
What? What are you saying?
Proof.
So whether or not I may have actually been onto something,
Proof of Bigfoot?
I guess that's for you to decide now, isn't it? For most people, when they start to get in their teenage years, well, speaking from a guy's perspective, of course, their focus tends to be more on girls, games, video games, and acting like they're the biggest bad motherfucker there is. At least the school I went to was awfully obsessed with fighting. And being the biggest guy who didn't really have a lot of friends or
Don't be cruel.
mostly kept to himself, probably got flagged as a potential school shooter at some point. I kept mostly to myself, mainly because I was always the target for them to try to stir up fights. The age-old advice, you want someone to leave you alone, find the biggest guy, knock him out.
You knocked him out.
Well, what am I supposed to do where I was the biggest guy? It truly is a vile situation. And unfortunately, may lead to some very dark outcomes here in the near future. The one thing that helped me kind of steer away from that path was the fact that I took on an interest in the supernatural. With ghosts, it was the spirit of Raymond Snowden at the Idaho State Penitentiary. ETs, it was my own abduction, even though I didn't quite realize it at the time. With situations like Bigfoot, the topic of cryptozoology in general seems to be highly misunderstood. I remember this one interview I was a guest on, and one of the final questions that the hosts asked that they like to ask a lot of people is that out of like ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids, cryptozoology, what would be the one thing you would like to see come to light to be proven that it actually does exist? Naturally, for me, the answer was UFOs, being that dealing with ghosts, you're literally having to wait for someone to die and somehow come back and tell you what happened. There might be some very unethical ways of going about testing those materials, but nevertheless, it would be very difficult, not necessarily impossible. And the subject of cryptozoology, people automatically assume that a lot of these creatures have some sort of mystical properties that makes them cryptids, but in reality, it's right there in the name. Crypto, hidden, zoology, animals, study of animals. Cryptozoology, study of hidden animals. And there have been several animals that are well documented today that were once considered cryptids. The okapi, orangutan, even rhinos could technically be considered cryptids at one point because the old school depictions of unicorns are highly believed to be misinterpretations of the rhino itself. So when it comes to the subject of Bigfoot, it's not that I didn't necessarily believe it wasn't out there. The possibility is always there. The possibility may be low, but it's truly never zero. And when it came to a majority of so-called Bigfoot hunters, I had to draw a lot of skepticism behind their claims because
people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
It seemed to me that they were utilizing the idea that Bigfoot may have been an extraterrestrial species, that it may have been extra-dimensional in some capacity, for the fact that it was so damn hard to find. Why it was so hard to potentially catch evidence of the creature. In mainstream science, whenever they're trying to catalog a new species, the usual indicators are obviously waste left behind by the creature, food fragments, parts of a corpse, and any trace amounts like strange hair fibers, unusual markings, things like that. The situation with the Sasquatch is where it treads lightly due to the fact that these beings do leave behind physical evidence that they've been around. But either they are extremely elusive for being such a big creature, or very clever in their own right, that anything such as finding physical bodies, waste materials, anything like that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it has. So following the idea that there was some sort of conspiracy to hide the evidence of some sort of woodland ape, some sort of big creature, seemed kind of out there. What would essentially be the purpose of hiding an animal if it was just that? When I initially begun looking into Bigfoot, my approach, and it's honestly an approach I recommend anybody interested in cryptozoology take, is that try to catalog it as an unknown animal, as what cryptozoology really is. So, being that we're dealing with what is essentially a believed to be an 8-foot tall gorilla with human-like intelligence.
Damn!
You sure you want to carry on with this?
Study apes. Read up on apes. What are their likely behaviors? Obviously, if this creature was in fact living, it was a physical being. It needed somewhere to sleep, it needed something to eat, and needed a source of water. Basic materials for any living creature to be able to survive. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, in a series of email correspondence with me, suggested this idea, and that is that if you are going out into the woods to try to look for Sasquatch, try to focus your attention on areas that may have a high bear population. Because if you got all the necessary requirements right there to be able to sustain a bear population, a large omnivore, a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, whatever name you want to use for that creature could potentially fit that same criteria. I'm dealing I'm talking about this scientific aspect of this first, in order to establish why this case in particular sticks out. And in order to do that, I got to start from the beginning. My first encounter with the Sasquatch, with a likely Sasquatch being, well, let's put it that way. I was in the 8th grade. So you're looking about age 12, 13. 12, 13, 14, right around there. And my class, we were on a school ski trip to the mountains. There's a ski resort that all the schools eventually plan trips to called Magic Mountain. Very popular in the area. It's located within Sawtooth National Forest, or within an area us locals from here in Idaho call the South Hills. The terrain is a bit rough. The road snakes a lot, and you got to be careful if you're speeding down the road, because there's quite a few blind spots where people have been known to get into accidents. But it is a paved road in order to get to this ski resort. It's not that hard to get to. It's a very beautiful area. I highly encourage any nature enthusiasts to actually explore it if you ever get the chance. A lot of big California types like to come up here to do just that. And you don't have to go off on any side roads. It's a main paved road, so if you're not comfortable going out and exploring, it's okay. The encounter in question didn't happen until after the ski trip was done and we were on our way home. As I established earlier, I didn't exactly get along with a lot of my classmates. A lot of them just seemed to want to try to fight me for whatever reason, to make themselves look bigger. So, on a bus full of kids, I was one of the only ones who was left to his own, left to pretty much just admire the scenery as we were leaving the mountains. We were coming back from Magic Mountain. Excuse me. A lot of haze here lately. We were coming back from Magic Mountain, and as I was just watching the scenery go by as the bus was driving down the mountain, I noticed a cave on the side of one of the mountains. There's a lot of sagebrush through that area, so if you try to go looking for it, it's probably overgrown. But there was this cave in the side of the mountain. Looked like it was somewhat easy to get to, but you had to really be careful with the terrain. Let's just say, while there is a lot of paved roads up that way, a lot of people still get injured, and fire rescue crews have a very hard time getting up there. So, you slip too wrong, you're probably SOL. The cave itself seemed to stand out. How nobody else noticed this, I'll never know. But I was watching this cave because I noticed the shadows start moving through it. And as I got closer, this thing stood at the mouth of the cave. And this thing looked huge, easily over 6 foot. I watched it as it watched the school buses go by. Just stood there, minding its own business. It rested its hand on the top of the cave like it was just relaxing there. And as I got to looking at it, I noticed its face. Kind of looked human, but if you were to look at human ancestors, the closest resemblance this thing had was to Australopithecus. A few moments go by, the school buses are completely past the cave. I'm still trying to eyeball it as much as I can because from what I could tell, from my perspective, it looked like whatever it was went back into the cave. It didn't come out or didn't look like it came out or anything like that. When my mind started to register that I just saw something, I started to look around, see if anybody else might have noticed. Just might. And of course, Weirdo Dakota's the only one that caught on because everybody just, yeah. One of the teachers I had at the time, she was sitting in the row across from me. She noticed that I started acting a little weird, started looking around. She goes, ask me, Dakota, you okay? What's going on? It's like, I think I just saw something come out of that cave. I didn't have any cameras on me, but I did have a camera on me, but quite frankly, I did have a camera on me, but quite frankly, I was so in shock by what I was seeing, the thought didn't even occur to me right then and there. And as I was telling my teacher what saw, started describing it. It looked kind of huge, kind of furry. And I don't know if she was being sarcastic or what. She didn't seem like the type, but she just looked at me and said, maybe it was Bigfoot.
No!
Whether or not she was trying to just mess with me in that moment, I don't know. But that was, in that moment, that was enough of the shock, if you will, that got me to realize maybe this thing is real.
It's real.
And anybody who's known me knows that I'm pretty much the type that's, if something catches my interest, I will just hyper focus on it, want to research it as much as I can. And the first opportunity I would get, I would want to go looking for this thing. And I would want to try to get as much evidence, as much info as I could on this thing to increase my odds of possibly even finding it. The opportunity didn't present itself for a couple more years. This is where the story gets to take a much more interesting turn.
Oh, hello. I know, right?
The first opportunity to get out into the field, to actually try to explore and find this creature I potentially saw, didn't come until 4th of July weekend of 2015. Unfortunately, the opportunity presented itself through a family camping trip.
So you were always an asshole.
Grandparents, uncles, aunts, mother, cousins, all of whom would not really support what I was doing. My grandfather was one case. He was always more supportive of my ventures than everyone else. This would also end up being the last big activity I got to do with him, as later that year in December would be when he lost his life to cancer. So when I say that dealing with the supernatural, it's quite intimate. There's a very good reason behind it, multiple reasons. And it's through these reasons why anytime someone says that, oh, I should go try to live a normal life, this and that, it almost feels like I'm dishonoring everything that this has brought me.
But what does that have to do with anything?
Had I not gone down this road, I wouldn't have been able to go out to explore, to truly see the world. Had I followed what everybody else thought was the right way, truthfully speaking, I probably would have risked medical injury. Some may be thinking, well, Dakota, if you have certain conditions like you mentioned in the past, wouldn't going out on these sort of hunts be dangerous to you? Yeah, it can be, but I've learned to manage. Besides, I hope I am never at the point where I'm so low that I just want to shrivel up and die again. I don't want to have whatever ails me, whatever's holding me down, to keep me down. I want to be able to go out and explore and to see these truly magnificent things. Granted, I was a teenager when I got my start. I started putting things together how I could. At the age of 14, by the age of 15, I started taking on cases, getting back into Sasquatch. This was my first opportunity to actually get out into the field. Not just get out into the field, but get out somewhere that I knew there was a documented history. See, here in Idaho, you would expect that one of the states here in the U.S. that has one of the highest numbers of natural forest reserves would have plenty of stories of things going bump in the night out in the wilderness. And it does. In the year 2017, a woman traveling along Highway 95 reported to authorities that she had been in a car accident and she had hit Bigfoot. No reports ever came out from police sources to indicate that was in fact what happened, but the story still remains. The latest incident of a Bigfoot sighting I became aware of was back in 2021 near Shoshone, Idaho, where, again, the authorities were called, this time because a farmer had reported a possible Bigfoot stalking his livestock, stalking his farm. And the thing is, with this case, he's actually had some animals go missing. Within the South Hills, there's plenty of areas one can get lost if you're not careful. I referenced earlier email correspondence what I had with Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, who is a university professor at Idaho State, often referred to as the Bigfoot professor. Chances are, if you've seen any sort of program on mainstream television involving Sasquatch, chances are you've probably seen it. These email correspondence didn't happen until years later, but to reference these, how I mentioned that he told me a good sort of reference to potentially gauge potential Sasquatch habitats would be to look for spots where large omnivores could easily sustain themselves. Is there a source of water nearby? Which, yes, there was. There was some creeks and rivers that actually flowed through the area that were the water is very clean to this day. Just make sure you're drinking from the running bits. Otherwise, sediment and eggs and other nasty stuff that can really mess up your system can collect at anywhere where it's still water.
What the hell's he doing?
But there's sources of water. There was food. There's fish. There's actually hatching grounds for fish at a spot that's not too far from Magic Mountain. In fact, it's much further into the mountains. It's referred to as the Hummingbird Sanctuary. Basically, some of the Forest Service guys set up a bunch of hummingbird feeders up in this area, fill them with sugar water to create like this hummingbird sanctuary. And it's really cool to get up to if you get the chance in the summertime. Excellent opportunity to escape the heat. And if you're wanting to talk about sustaining the likely protein intake that a large 7 to 8 foot tall creature would need in order to sustain itself, there are spots where you can get berries and fruits, probably dredge up some good roots as well up there. But there was often deer, elk, sometimes even moose up that way. However, for anyone who tries to go to explore this area in recent years, nature is slowly starting to come back to the area, but during the Antifa riots, for some reason, Antifa protesters that year, a few years back, set fire to the area.
Assholes.
Which, aside from trying to find a spot that was somewhat difficult to get to for authorities to be able to put out the flames, there was nothing there. Unless these absolute assholes, and I don't care, they were assholes. They were looking to destroy what they thought would have slowed down people here in Idaho. They clearly took to the assumption that we were nothing but a bunch of rednecks that still had to go hunt for our dinner. Slowly, nature is starting to come back, but you can still see a lot of the dead material through there. So whether or not the Sasquatch is still there, who knows? Maybe it is. I haven't had any reports come forward. For those of you who are interested, the campsite we went to was Diamondfield Jack Campground. This spot was named after an old prospector talking about Idaho's connection to the Wild West days, who would constantly brag that some of the exploits he was getting into, mining for diamonds, mining for gold, he was going to be this rich millionaire. Diamondfield Jack, essentially it was people making fun of him, and the name just stuck. Eventually he did manage to find some riches, but when he moved down to Las Vegas, he would actually end up getting killed after being hit by a taxi. That's the story there. Allegedly, I've heard some local rumors, but nothing substantiated. There is treasure near here as well. So if you want to go exploring, honestly, I think a majority of people that go into this type of stuff need to actually get out of the house more and explore, see things for themselves, instead of just being faceless icons on the internet looking to bitch because they're miserable at life and want everybody else to be as miserable as them. I said it. Because if you actually go out and experience things, that increases your odds of seeing something extraordinary. In order to prepare for this case, I had some interesting intel come my way. One came from a gentleman, I believe, out of North Carolina. He was a retired forensics investigator. He had set up some thermal cameras in an area of woods where Bigfoot sightings were rather well known, rather often reported. And he would often set out little food, meats, maybe some vegetables, some fruits, and he would set these traps in such a way that he the creature would have to physically be in front of the camera and set it off if he wanted to get this food. Interestingly enough, one night he actually managed to capture some pretty incredible footage that looks like a large bipedal creature with very long arms. And this creature seemed to be well aware that the camera was on him, but he was really wanting the treat that was left out for him. Now, this treat was something a little different than this gentleman's normal routine because he ran out of his normal supplies and all he had was a chocolate bar. So he figured, what the heck, set out the chocolate in front of this camera, see what happens. Apparently, Bigfoot likes chocolate. So, seeing that this was the result, and I had a limited time to try to capture something, just anything, I had limited funds, limited resources, and limited time. So, in order to try to see what I had in mind, see if I could actually capture anything, I went with what seemed to do the most to attract the creature. I knew it was up there, somewhere in that area. And through various reports I dug up, it seemed the sound of children, dogs, chainsaws, and apparently chocolate seemed to lure this creature out, seemed to drag its attention towards campers. I had my younger cousins, who at the time, my younger cousins and my sister, who at the time, if I remember correctly, the oldest of them was like 12 years old and all below. And aside from the 12-year-old, the youngest ones knew very well that I did this stuff. They wanted to help, so I took advantage of the free labor for camera equipment. I had a small night vision camcorder. It's one of those little cheap ones. They're like a little black brick. I think I have somewhere in my stash stills, and the built-in USB. I also had a pair of night vision goggles.
Oh, cool, night vision.
One of those Spynet toy ones that had the little display screen on the inside of it that was about the same size as the screen on an old flip phone. Like I said, I was a teenager. I didn't majority of my income was what I got from babysitting. That's it. And because I wanted to build something, I wanted to build all this, get out into the field, see this stuff, and go exploring, do this a lot more. My family took full advantage as long as they tried to slip me a few bucks here and there. It's even quoted in one of the earliest book appearances I did. In fact, I see the book here right now, Hauntings from the Snake River Plain. There should be a link to this, and a link to the Amazon listing for this in the episode description, but my mother is even quoted saying that it was a decent activity that helped keep me out of trouble. Because let's face it, at a young age, I knew I was experiencing some random stuff, and I also knew very well that if I partook in the use of certain substances or got involved in certain activities, I would not be taken as seriously.
No shit!
Back in these days, I actually used to hide my age, which was pretty easy for me to do, being that I was already going bald and over 6 foot. At this time, I was about 6'5", or a US men's size 15 shoe.
It's a big foot.
I bet he's a big fella.
I'm not exaggerating this. So up until I did an appearance on a local radio station, very few people actually had any inclination that I was underage. By the time it got leaked out, people were impressed enough with what I set up by myself that it didn't matter, which makes these findings, which helps me quite a bit. So with the night vision camcorder I had, the old 8 megapixel digital camera I had, as well as the night vision goggles, the chocolate, and some plastic powder, casting powder, I had set up my tents, dealt with the family mess, and scoped out the area for a couple nights before I officially tried anything to see if I could spot anything on my own, just to kind of get a lay of the land, understand where I could go, get a rough idea of where something large enough could easily be hiding. Night 1, took a few photos, looked around, nothing. Night 2, looked around some more, nothing. Night 3 came around. Mind you, this was in the middle of summer, and I'm from the US, so we had a few months in the summer where we were off school, so there was no concern around that. Day 3 came about. It was time to see if I could lure this thing out because I was running out of time. I had maybe 2 more nights to work with at best. That's how long my uncles and my grandfather talked about staying up there. Like I said, this was sort of the last big family activities I got to do with my grandfather because it would be later that year we would lose him from cancer. So I wanted to spend time with my grandfather as well. Throughout the whole camping trip, my grandfather even mentioned that he had the feeling something was watching the campground. And he was the type, he liked to go outdoors a lot. So he knew that there was a pretty good chance, if you had something stalking you, you stay very still, you do not move, and eventually the thing will lose interest. And he also reported that this thing, whatever it was,
And what the hell is that smell?
seemed to smell bad. Now, you go to areas like Deep South down in Florida, their Bigfoot reports, the name they tend to use is skunk ape because it's a big, hairy, stinky ape. And that's actually one of the clues to watch for if you're ever in a situation where you're trying to look for Bigfoot is the smell, because that means it's close and watching. Remember, you ever go out into the woods, chances are the animals are going to see you before you see them. So the indication was there that something intelligent enough to hide itself was watching us, seeing what we were up to. If anything, it was just as curious of us as I was of it. So night 3 came around. I wanted to try to catch an actual cast of a Bigfoot print. So I needed to find the optimal area. Obviously, I needed the ground to be soft enough for a large animal to be able to leave a decent print. At the same time, I also wanted it somewhere close to the camp so I could watch from a distance if it came out of hiding. I went a little further into the trees, found a tree stump. The ground was kind of soft, but I needed it to be a little looser. So I grabbed a shovel and some rakes that we brought along and loosened up the dirt as much as I could, using the rake to level it out to try to avoid any potential contamination. Have someone say, oh, you had that print because of how you stepped the ground with the shovel or something along those lines. I tried to be smart about it. Directly from this stump, about a good 40 feet. Like I said, it was a good distance enough from the camp, but close enough I could physically see it, and I could physically see the campfire that was going. Try to be somewhat safe while I'm doing this as well. I had the chocolate with me. I'm setting up the area. I'm loosening up the ground. Like I said, I was about 6'5" at the time, so I used my own bodily portions, to try to gauge what a creature that was a little bit bigger than me, the space it would need. What would be the light, how far back from this tree stump would it go to reach for the candy, things like that. And as I was doing this, it was getting to be about 10 o'clock at night. It was dark. The stars were out. Beautiful night. I get this kind of feeling that I'm being watched. And out of my peripherals, I started noticing what looks like a small child kind of stand back, which is just watching what I'm doing, but not wanting to really disturb me, right? My first thought was that maybe it was just one of my cousins coming up, seeing what I'm doing. They knew that this was something I've been wanting to do, trying to set it up. They weren't wanting to get in the way. But here's the thing. I caught a little bit more of the creature out of my peripheral. I'd say it was about a little over 4 feet tall and looked like a chimp. It did not look human. It looked like a weird chimpanzee. Now, the nearest zoo I could think of at the time was in Boise. So I highly doubt that there was a chimp on the loose watching in that moment. I even got to focus in a little bit more on it. If that thing was a monkey, it was standing awfully straight. Chimps tend to have that little bit of a slouch to them. Even gorillas normally do. Saw the flickers of its eye. It had very dark eyes, dark kind of complexion. And then I realized, wait a fucking second. That thing's not human. And in a moment of excitement, I jumped, started to tense. I looked directly at the creature, just to get a more direct view of it. I saw it and it realized the second I realized it was there, the little bastard ran. And I followed suit, but it was dark. I had no flashlight, and it had dark fur, and it was fast. I had no chance. So as I go back to camp, a couple of my uncles, my grandmother, they're looking at me like, Dakota, what did you just see? And I'm just like, I'm looking at them like, I think I just saw a baby Bigfoot watching me. And my mother, being the type that always tries to deny and stir up an argument, it seems some days. They're like, oh, maybe it was a wolf or a coyote. While it's not necessarily unheard of for canine-like species to walk on their hind legs under certain circumstances, or bears even, more common bears. They have more muscle structure to be able to handle it, but dogs can walk on their hind legs under certain circumstances, usually just for short distances, but sometimes you get that one smart dog that maybe lost his front legs and got a bit clever. So who knows? That was not. I argued with her that it was not a wolf. It was not a wolf. There were coyotes up that way, but they wouldn't not be standing like that. She even argued further and further. She actually went home earlier that night. When this argument took place was when I got home. I wanted to stay up and see if I could catch something. The following morning, I should clarify, when I would tell the story at home, my mother argued that maybe it was a wolf staring at you. There's no wolves there. She and my sister are the types that, try to argue for no reason, just looking to argue and not really have a lot of logic behind their arguments either. But when I actually conducted this experiment, she had actually gone home. So I had a little bit more leeway. I went to sit at the campfire for a little bit. I was eyeballing the woods the entire time just to see if I could spot anything happening. Soon everybody went to bed, and I was too jacked up from what I just saw. So I went to my tent, crawled in my sleeping bag. I acted like I was closing up my tent, but left it open just a little bit so I can watch the spot where I left the chocolate earlier with my night vision goggles. And finally, my adrenaline had calmed down, and I fell asleep before I saw anything. The next morning, I wake up. I'm sitting at the campfire. It's just me, my uncles, and my grandfather left. And I'm just sitting there having a little bit of breakfast. So one of my uncles was saying, so, Dakota, did you see anything last night? He knew what I was up to. In that moment, I was like, oh shit, I forgot I set the trap, and I had not gone to check it yet. And to my surprise, I shouted to the top of my lungs. The whole mountains could probably hear me. I got something. Oh, I was so happy with this. While I did not manage to capture any physical photos, videos, anything like that of the potential creature, what I did manage to find, what I managed to collect, rather, was this. I took this cast by myself, comparing it to my size 15 foot at the time. Nowadays, Actually, wait. My foot's gotten a little bit bigger nowadays. Let's see. So this is my shoe here. US men's size 20. But based off of my foot, I would estimate this thing to at least have been a US men's size 16. This thing would have been huge. The fact that there was a child alone, as well as multiple sightings just from myself, that in itself insinuates there was more than one creature. Any doubt that there was just a single Bigfoot out there is ridiculous. So this means this thing is able to keep itself fed, able to protect itself, find shelter, and find a suitable mate. The fact that this was my first official hunt when it comes to one of these things, and I was actually able to capture something, that was life-changing in itself. That adds a streak of credibility to my claims that there is something up there. And whatever it was just as curious about me as I was of it, especially that juvenile. Was this case risky? Absolutely. Anytime you're dealing with potentially wild animals, it's risky. But in a general scope of Bigfoot reports, at least here in the US, it seems that the more East Coast you go, towards New York, North Carolina, Florida, all these areas, there's a lot more violent reports going out this way. Whereas where I'm at in the West, the reports tend to be a bit more calm. These creatures are keeping to themselves, they're not really bothering anybody. That's it. However, in one of the first episodes of a sort of a side series for the Bald and Bonker show, I invited Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum onto the show, to which he revealed that a little bit south from me, across the Nevada line, there's actually stories from Native American tribes of large, hairy creatures kidnapping children, infants. You analyze the numerous reports by various regions, it is actually safe to assume that these creatures have some sort of tribal characteristics. They fall into the same ranks. They have a sort of a tribal hierarchy towards them, much like early humans, native cultures, and even several species of ape. In fact, recent studies of chimpanzees have actually pointed out the chimps are actually starting to exhibit behaviors similar to early Stone Age religious practice. In fact, some researchers are even stating that chimpanzees are in their version of the Stone Age. So all of this behavior matches out. The assumption that Bigfoot is just going to be some gentle giant that eats nothing but berries is highly unlikely, because a creature that big needs its protein, and it needs a lot of calories in order to sustain itself. Otherwise, just like humans, they could fall into some medical mishaps and potentially risk themselves. Some ideas that get tossed around that a majority of Sasquatch sightings, and I've even seen this with Ancient Aliens, that a majority of them seem to be more tribalistic,
Redneck.
almost like barbarian versions. While, I'm just going to say it, the reports of Sasquatch coming out of UFOs sound more like Chewbacca. Me personally, I have not seen any correlation to UFO activity in my own field work, but that doesn't always necessarily mean it's there. The lack of evidence does not necessarily mean the lack of existence. These things are out there, and it's more than enough that people should take the time to truly go out into the wilderness. Be smart about it, pack safe, and explore. Truly explore what is going on in this world. Because simply relying on whatever device you're watching this from, relying on your news broadcasters, relying on politicians, that's not going to be enough. You're going to find yourself susceptible to the ideas, thoughts, and filters that may have already put into place from those broadcast media. You don't have to be anyone special to truly explore these things. You just have to be willing to explore. Be respectful towards your surroundings and others involved. show kindness, and you can just lure just about any animal out. Again, you also have to be knowledgeable. There's been several groups that I've affiliated with that have asked me, what are my tips for going out on these types of investigations? Well, I know the standard fashion for any sort of supernatural investigation is borderline emo goth. But first off, please, 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 if you decide to take that leap and go exploring for yourself, exercise some basic hunter safety. Be mindful of your surroundings. Wear bright colors so you will be easier to spot. The color orange, as you see with a lot of hunting gear, not a lot of people realize this, but deer, elk, moose, animals like that, they're partially colorblind, and that color by itself tends to blend in with the trees. Much like how the fur of a tiger is able to blend in with the dark stripes because it emulates sun peeking through the trees. Be mindful of your surroundings. Observe what is going on. Take careful notes. Try to have some decent equipment with you, but don't rely too much on it. Machines can break. The animals, they're much smarter than most people give them credit for. I mean, allegedly, going back to stories from here in Idaho, some people allege that, according to his journal entries, President Theodore Roosevelt may have actually shot at a Bigfoot-like creature near Yellowstone. And when it comes to Sasquatch itself, again, if you show that you are not a threat to the environment, a threat to its turf, it will leave you alone. It may scope you out just to make sure you mind yourself. But if you go to piss it off, chances are they will attack. And these things can throw boulders. No effort. Elena Denon, in her book, I'm gonna grab my copy of it real quick. In her book, Encyclopedia Galactica, Portraits of the Star Nations, from Book 1, From Andromeda to Kansas Minor, she actually adds fuel to the Bigfoot is an extraterrestrial debate through much of her works, stating that these were actually sort of refugees from a planet that used to be within the asteroid belt that was destroyed. Mainstream science actually speculates that there may have been a large, almost planetary body within the asteroid belt that somehow got destroyed because of the concentration of asteroids by itself. It seems awfully high compared to other star systems. I will have a link to this book in the episode description, as well as to the news articles referenced, and especially where the earlier video thermal footage I showed comes from, so you can get yourselves a little bit more backstory behind each one if you choose to do so. None of these clips are an attempt on my behalf to try to claim any sort of copyright. These were simply just put together to help illustrate the story, to show some resources, and allow people to allow people to go explore on their own if they so choose so. In fact, I have her right here. She has them listed as the Kutu, and here she goes into detail that one of the planets they allegedly resided on was within our solar system's asteroid belt, a planet called Maldek, and it was destroyed in a war. It should also be noted that the planet Mars, its surface is believed to look the way it does now because of some sort of major cataclysm. Something clearly happened. Exactly what, it's hard to say till alleged looking glass technologies becomes more available to the rest of the population. And for those of you who don't know what that is, those are said to be devices that can look through space and time and allow the user to observe any event that transpired anywhere. Certainly would be helpful to utilize such technologies to solve some of the biggest mysteries that we have. But who knows? If we go to solve these mysteries, what else comes forward? Because the journey for answers never ends. I will also have a link to the episode of Bald and Bonkers Contact, or at least the archives version of it, for the Jeffrey Meldrum interview, so you can see what he had to say. He was an individual in regards to this subject I've wanted to meet for a very long time. And once we established a little bit of rapport towards the end of the episode, I showed him the picture of the casting, to which he seemed quite impressed. So, my final thoughts. Is there truth to the Sasquatch? Oh yeah, something's out there. Is it an alien? Maybe. Several reports all over the world suggest that the Sasquatch may actually have the capability to understand human language. In some cases, they can speak English. Some native legends talk about very similar beings interacting with various tribes as if it was just another day. They were some sort of forest guardians. Guardians of what? Who knows? Some have speculated they are forest spirits meant to try to help protect the trees, preserve wildlife. Some have suggested there may be an inner earth connection. In regards to my case, the caves up in the South Hills, they are volcanic in nature. There are old lava caverns not too far from me, and it's partially responsible to why the state of Idaho is known as the Gem State, where we have some of the highest numbers of different minerals found anywhere. In fact, we have minerals and gems here that are so rare. We have like the star garnet, if I remember correctly. It's only found here in Idaho and in India. Certainly interesting, ain't it? As far as Bigfoot being some sort of undiscovered ape, it's possible. One of the theories out there is that it may be a modern descendant of the Gigantopithecus, which essentially was a giant ape, but it was actually an ancestor of modern orangutans that essentially went to extinct because climate change basically killed off all of its food. And with these creatures, could there be some sort of branch evolution that became humans? Maybe. Are they interdimensional? Possibly. Elena's book points out that very possibility. And I'm using these terms in sort of a generic, alleged sort of framework to try to keep room for error. I don't want this to become some sort of gospel. What I would like is for anybody in the audience to share their thoughts. Let's get a discussion going. Hell, if you believe you've had some sort of encounter with a very similar being, share your story. I would be more than happy to hear it. Search for truth never ends, because the second one answer is found, a million more will always come up. And who knows, maybe there'll be an opportunity. You may have a chance to sit down one-on-one and have a conversation with one of these beings. The possibilities are endless, but you'll never know until you actually get off your ass, go explore, and see what all this world has to offer. My name is Dakota Frandsen.